Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. I am Evee Martinez, and today we are going to be talking about learning disabilities. We're going to cover what are learning disabilities, some characteristics of learning disabilities, a little bit of history of disabilities, and we're going to interview an individual with a learning disability. And that individual that we'll be interviewing will be myself, because I myself do have a learning disability. So now let's get right into it. Learning disabilities are not new. They've been like existing for a bit now. They've been existing only for like 5 centuries. That's not that old, not that new. It's kind of in the middle. And learning disabilities that were first discovered to be like such as individuals or students who are at typical knowledge but fail to learn as easily or efficiently as their classmates, meaning they are perfectly intelligent. They're at where they're supposed to be developmentally, but they seem to really struggle academically, and specific focus of like math, language, speech, writing, and that comes with spelling as well. And the definition now for the 21st century is a learning disability is an umbrella concept covering a wide range of difficulties or students who struggle in these difficulties, right? But before 1972, learning disabilities were students who were mentally retarded, or they were just used as students who were neurologically impaired, meaning they were broken or viewed as dumb or viewed as stupid or perceptibly disordered or dyslexic, slow learner, remedial reader, or hyperactive. And of course, these terms are no longer acceptable because now we know they affect the student a lot more negatively, like with their self-esteem, and overall it's just not correct to say. um it's a disorder that delays development in academics cognitively, very different from individual disability, like Down syndrome. But it's like how I mentioned before, focuses on certain characteristics. How do we know when a child is showing or not displaying accurate academic level and performances? And one way to figure out if your child is not performing in academic level preferences or is not showing those type of academic successes is when their reading levels are lower than normal. Their listening comprehension skills are not as there as they are with their other students, other peers. Written expressions is not clearly portrayed or unlegible to read. Basic reading skills aren't there. They struggle with phonics, which is the production of letters and their sounds. Reading comprehension, they're not understanding what they read. Mathematics or calculation, they're not able to solve these problems, understand, read them. Mathematic reasoning, not understand that everything's within the steps and follow the steps correctly. They struggle, they get lost within doing them. It is known as, rather than a syndrome, than a particular student. Everybody is different. No one child is going to be, oh, this is what a learning disability looks like, so this child is going to follow these characteristics to a T. Learning disabilities has an interesting history. It's been a lot of controversies since the 50s, the 60s, till now. It's an ever-changing field. It's been always improving or improved. Before, there was very little research, and students were kind of put in groups. They're kind of floating in academics. When students were struggling, they seemed to not really kind of pay attention, let them fall behind. They didn't get the help or accommodations they need. They were like just mentioned that they were slow or they were lazy, or they're dumb and they are just, school is not for them and they weren't helping. But a modern day concept of learning disability, students are now not viewed as lazy or slow. Now they're viewed as students who just need a support, a safety net to excel in academics, accommodations, whether it be extra time for tests, um, support while reading, tutoring, X, Y, and Z. And Samuel Kirk in the 1963 is the roots of this concept, where it lies studies from brain functions conducted in the 19th century. They were he was specifically looking into reading and speech, and he realized that these individuals um, aren't damaged in the brain, because he did a study for with individuals that do have brain damage, but they are intelligent. They just struggle, like we mentioned before, on particular sections, just like speech and language. Um, and he thought that they were just not going to be able to do anything, but they were able to do everything that is a normal person to do. They just struggled in this one specific thing. So at that time, they're saying that, well, individuals with learning disabilities are not brain damaged. They just need extra support and extra accommodations in academics. And this, of course, was in the later century. Now, getting in closer to the earlier, to this century, I'm talking about like 90s, the 20th century, learning disabilities became established in schools across the United States. Before they weren't even acknowledged. And it was Samuel Quirk who popularized the term learning disabilities. He changed the fields in that sense. He made it more welcoming, more accepting, less destigmatized, as they say. And it was to help parents whose children have been diagnosed with learning disabilities. And though they were previously developed, like those children were previously diagnosed as neurologically impaired, perpetually handicapped, brain damaged, or other horrible labels, he has introduced them to tell them, like, hey, like, no, your child is not brain damaged. Your child is not handicapped. Your child is not impaired. They're very much able to live a successful, happy life. They just need accommodations. That is all. And we continue to the 21st century, where now schools are having new tools like RTI, which is the Universal Design for Learning tool, and that specifically teaches educators how to accommodate their lesson plans for students with learning disabilities, whether they give them visuals and reading material, or videos and articles, or hands-on activities, such as like playing with Play-Doh, or painting, or drawing, or coloring, versus writing a paper. Or they can do a theater performance and act about whatever they're learning instead of, like, say, a presentation. And we continue to now the prevalence of learning disabilities, and it's saying that now it's more common because we are now a lot more educated than we were before. Before, learning disabilities were very stigmatized and quote quote not as common, but it was because they were underlooked and not defined. And now learning disabilities are being defined and not overlooked. And they did investigations, or they did research saying, where are these learning disabilities coming from? A lot of scientists have said that acquired trauma from prenatal, postnatal, and perinatal have a lot to do with it. So prenatal causes, which is during birth, Illicit drug uses from parents, smoking, use of alcohol can be tied to certain learning disabilities. Prenatal causes, which is during birth, could be anorexia, which is an eating disorder, premature or low birth weights. So when the child is born really early, a preemie baby, and they're severely underweight, that can cause a chemical imbalance that could be tied to learning disabilities. Prolonged and difficult delivery or trauma caused by medical instruments such as forceps. And of course, research doesn't say, like, yes, this is the defined cause, this is set in stone, but they're saying that this could potentially or has shown some ties to learning disabilities. It's not set in stone. Postnatal causes can be concussions, which is after birth, like the child's hair injury resulting from falls or accidents, high fever, meningitis, and collapses, which is a severe sicknesses, severe illnesses, strokes, things like that, that could be potentially tied to be the causes of learning disabilities. And they've investigated in genetics as well, whether it's passed down within your families, within your parents. And this one's kind of up in the air. They say yes, they say no. They're still researching this. This is still pretty kind of new. They did a study between the exotic twins, and one has a learning disability and one doesn't, and they're trying to see whether it has something to do with genetics. And they haven't really came with conclusion or concrete results. Environmental possibilities can as well be tied to learning disabilities. So, like, for example, malnutrition. If poor nutrition happens due to, let's say, poverty, those can pose as risk factors to learning disabilities. Socioeconomic status, as I mentioned, poverty. Neurological dysfunction is a result from these, or they're saying it could be a result from these. And more characteristics in children with learning disabilities could be attention disorders. If they have little to no attention spans and like more regular attention spans than their peers, less regular attention spans to the peers, things like that. Hyperactivity, if they can't stay still or can't focus on one specific thing. Information processing problems, they take longer to process things or instructions, for example, or topics than their peers. That could be a sign of a potential learning disability. Lack of cognitive strategies needed for efficient learning. So if they don't get the support that they need, or the right tutoring, or being read to at an early age, for example, that can pose as a risk or like a characteristic for learning disabilities. Memory difficulties, oral language difficulties, poor gross and fine motor skills, psychological processing defects, quantitative disabilities, reading disorders, social emotional challenges, and writing language problems are all characteristics of your child potentially having a learning disability. And overall, that is the brief history and definition of learning disabilities. We are now entering our interview process, but before I start that, these are some successful people with learning disabilities that I wanted to share. Octavia Spencer is an amazing actress. She is known for her role as Minnie in The Help. Amazing. Space scientist slash space communicator Maggie Adrian is dyslexic, and she's a scientist, which I find really cool. Renowned author and writer Agatha Christie, very famous, known for her books, is also dyslexic, and so is Octavia Spencer. And dyslexia is a disorder or a disability that affects the processing of understanding sounds of letters and reading letters and words without flipping them. They flip them. That's a common thing. Now we're entering the interview process. I myself am diagnosed with a learning disability. I was diagnosed in the 3rd grade with dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and processing issues. Dyscalculia is essentially the struggle with mathematics, reading, solving, and understanding mathematics. And dysgraphia is the struggle with English, which is reading comprehension, writing, spelling, reading in general. And then processing issues is understanding everything um, at an appropriate speed or an appropriate level and an appropriate time. Um, Before I was diagnosed, I struggled a lot with academics, and it's like hindered my self-esteem. And I really loved school and I loved going to school, but because I was falling behind so fast, it was just very hard to go to school. I would pretend to be sick because I didn't want to go, and it didn't help that socially I would get made fun of a lot for having a learning disability. And it was before I was diagnosed, so kids would just make fun of me because I didn't know how to read. Or kids would make fun of me because I didn't know how to spell my name. And they're like, how do you not know how to spell your name? How do you know how not to read when you're in the first grade? And I just tell them, like, I don't know, it's confusing for me. And I remember this vividly. I had a kindergarten teacher who was not very kind teacher, patient teacher. She was not. And she particularly did not like the type of student I was. I would always raise my hand to ask questions, and when she called me to read, I couldn't read, and she would embarrass me in front of the class, and she was just not patient with me, and I was always getting in trouble because I wasn't able to do the work properly. And I found that to be so unfair. And I would come home crying every single day, struggling. And my mom was like, this teacher is not a good teacher. She's not okay. She shouldn't be doing this. And if I wasn't being harassed by my teacher, I was being harassed by my peers. And my mom went to the principal and she reported her. And the principal was like, you need to have a meeting with her first before I do anything. And my mom was like, okay. And she tried to set the meeting up with her. And she did not set up a meeting with my mom. Like, she refused. She ignored her emails. She ignored her calls. And it wasn't until, like, months after trying to meet with her, the principal forced her to meet with my mom. And they set a meeting day. And my mom attends. And this teacher is 30 minutes late to the meeting. And my mom was like, okay, I have to go home. I don't have time for this. But I'm doing this for my daughter. And the teacher walks in and she doesn't apologize for being late. She doesn't say hi to my mom or anything. She just slams her books. And she's like, I have 30 other children. I don't have time for your daughter. And my mom curses her out. Yes, that was not professional. It was not professional from the teacher's hand either, but my mom was frustrated and was like, that's your job. And after that, the teacher did not continue not treating me nicely. She ended up being suspended. And that was just kindergarten. And moving on to first grade, they just kept passing me along. And my mom kept forcing meetings with principals and having conversations saying, what's wrong with my daughter? She is not academically where she's supposed to be. She's very bright. She's very intelligent. She loves school. She pays attention. She is not lazy. She's just trying her best, but she is not getting the support that she needs. And the school refused to acknowledge anything. And it wasn't until my mom went to the head district and they did something about that. And I got tested, and this was finally a hit third grade. I had to repeat first grade, so I had to flunk first grade because I was very much behind. And I eventually moved elementary schools as well, and that's when I got my accommodations, was when I moved elementary schools. And after I repeated first grade. It was all of second grade was testing for these accommodations and all the paperwork it needed to prove that I needed these accommodations. And in these tests, it came up that yes, I have a lot of learning difficulties. I have issues with math, English, and all these processing disorders. And my mom was like, that makes sense. Because at home, she would get very frustrated. Her and my dad, everyone would start crying. I would start crying, they would start crying because I would shut down while we're doing my homework. They would explain it to me and I would not get it. It would not stick. I was confused. Everything was backwards for me. I just was very burned out. And now to finally get answers for that burnout was extraordinary. I don't even know what to say or how to describe it. And then I started going to special education. I had an IEP and I would get pulled out for RSP. And RSP is Resources for Special Children, I believe. I believe that's what it is. And I helped very much. It gave me an extra explanation for mathematics and English. I would learn it at school, like in my classroom, my general ed classroom. Then I was pulled out for an hour and I repeated the exact same thing I learned in my general ed classroom at a slower pace and more detailed. And I was able to take my time. And I finally understood it and it finally clicked. But this being said, the issue was not solved completely. Yes, I was able to succeed academically on my own now, but it still follows me all through high school. And the bullying as well, and teachers as well. I've had a lot of really bad teachers that have had parent conference meetings with my mom and tell me that I would not even graduate high school. I would not go to college. I would not have a successful academic life. They're just keeping me and they're just passing me just to pass me. And my mom was just like, that's not true. Like, my daughter is very capable of success. And I was very much viewed as the odds against me. And some academic teachers wouldn't even try to work with me. And I got some amazing teachers that did work with me. And they were patient with me. And they helped me succeed. And I am extremely grateful for them because without them, some of my successes wouldn't have came true. But that's a little bit about me. That's my interview for my disabilities. In this picture, I put my high school graduation, something that they told me I wasn't ever gonna do, and I did. And then this is my bachelor's graduation picture. And I got my bachelor's in child development, and I told myself I was going to be that special education preschool teacher that build the foundation for these students, that to show them that they can be successful, they can have amazing careers, they can have successful lives. And that is all for this week's podcast. Thank you.